how do you define an orgasm?
Define that for me, sexual being. How do you define sex?
Hi, I'm Alex. America raised me to be ignorant about sex.
The vulva? I think that's what that is.
It's not the vulva.
Vagina majoris, the vagina minoris.
Not quite.
The first frame was shot in 2014, and the first audience saw it in 2021. So it was pretty much a 7-year journey from beginning to end, yeah. So we had a core crew of, I would say, it was pretty small, maybe 5 people. So an editor, DP, co-writer with me, co-producer, and then another producer. And we were the main crew. For the most part, we used a Sony A7 II. I don't know if I can quantify hours, but it was a lot, probably hundreds of hours of combing through lots of media from, 60s, 70s, 80s, just kind of trying to see how we talked about sex. I've said the word sex more than I can imagine. It's almost like a meaningless word to me now. The words that I was so scared of saying in public at the beginning of this process to now, it's night and day.
We don't wait for people to say, I'm ready for algebra. We introduce that when they're developmentally ready to take on algebra. Ovaries.
The cervix.
Called an erection.
Clitoris.
Exactly when did you come up with this idea, and why did you want to make a documentary about sex?
I think I've always wanted to make a documentary about sex. I just didn't know that's what I wanted to do. I've lived many careers, and a lot of it has been around science communication, health reporting. But ultimately, what drove me to those fields was my own helping me understand who I was as a queer person. How do I understand my biology in a way that makes me happy, fulfilled, have a meaningful life? Because what I was being told by the culture at large was the opposite. In my mind, I was like, this is going to be like the sexiest episode of Nova. It was kind of more of like a PBS, a documentary kind of thing. But as I went through it, I realized really at the core, and I credit this to my co-writer, Leo Neri, who was asking me questions like, these interviews you're getting are interesting, but why? I feel like there's more. Why are you wanting to do this? I equated a lot to coming out of the closet. The first time I came out of the closet, I literally would have rather killed myself than do it. But it was a life or death thing. And now, 20 years later, saying I'm gay is I don't even think twice about it. It's very natural to me. And I thought coming out of the closet was the end of that process, but I think it was just the beginning when I look back. That ultimately there are a lot of things we all need to come out about if we want to be fully expressed, not just in terms of in the bedroom, but just like in the world. That how much more beautiful is life. That when the people you love, close to, trust, know who you are inside and out, and you don't have that weight of having to hide a part of yourself or to tiptoe around a part of yourself. It's just so much more freeing. And so the beginning was super tough, but by the end, I was hungry for more.
So at 36 years old, I'm finally going to confront my fears head on.
Who was the most difficult, I wonder, to convince to come on camera?
So the most difficult interviews to get on camera were with Pornhub, and then also with the parent-child sex education classes. Pornhub, I think for very obvious reasons, are scared if too much light is being shown into their business practices. And I get it. It's a very complicated, nuanced topic. And we were really just interested in their data, right? Like, what are people actually searching? They have the best database in terms of what humans actually fantasize about and enjoy. So that we had to be very clear. We didn't show where in the world they were. We didn't show any faces. We didn't show their offices. So that was difficult. Then the other one, of course, parent-children. I think any parent would be nervous about showing their children in a sex ed class, especially in, as much as we would like to think things are changing, and they are very fast, there's still just so much risk involved in the blowback of young children getting sex education. So just assuring them that, they didn't have to be on camera if they didn't want to. My purpose was not to be salacious. It was to show that sex education at its core can help families have difficult conversations. It's really, sex education at its best is really about helping families have the conversations that we haven't been trained to have. Did you ever think you had to have a sex talk with the kids?
I always thought Dad should do it.
So what was the one thing about sex education in America that you learned that surprised you the most?
That good, comprehensive sex education has been around in this country since the 70s. The best sex education today, you could find, the language might be a little different, the vocabulary might be different, but it's there. The principles are there, the understanding that sexual shame is really something that is damaging, and how you talk about very simple things from masturbation to homosexuality to trans issues. A lot of different things are there, but that ultimately because the United States, for better or worse, is hyper local when it comes to the politics around sex education, it's very difficult for a school board member to campaign on the platform of like, let's talk about anal sex in schools. Let's talk about masturbation in schools. Let's talk about pleasure is good. And, because we live in such a sex negative culture, it's hard to push past the people's boundaries. It feels very intractable, and it's disappointing that it still has not made the strides that it should have.
But in America, comprehensive sex ed still meets a lot of resistance.
They should stay out of sex. That belongs to the family.
Has there been any positive changes that you've seen in this country from when you started 7 years ago, started making this until now?
California became the first state in the nation to mandate comprehensive sex education for 12-year-olds and older. That was the first in 2016. There's a map in the movie where we talk about the sex ed across the US. And as we were making it in 2020, we had to keep changing it because everything started to get better. More states are taking out their anti-gay curricula. More states are making things needing to be medically accurate. But it's it really feels 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because in the last year and a half, a lot of those successes have been rolled back in many states. So it feels like we're still very far from where we need to go. But if you take the long view, if you take the view of 20, 30 years ago, we are miles ahead of where we were. We still, compared to other developed countries, it's not great, but there is progress going forward. And hopefully with more people running for office, more people getting involved in the process, those changes can continue.
But if you, your parents, and their parents never learned to talk about sex, how do you learn to talk about sex?
I'm just curious, like your own personal views on sex education. Yeah, how did they change from the beginning to the end of this film?
Sex education can start really from birth to death. It is not a one class, one talk thing. Your body's always changing, your relationships are always changing, your understanding of the world is always changing. It's something that you should be kind of checking in with all the time. And I think, sitting in sex education classes with young children at the beginning, I was so tense and uncomfortable being there. But that was kind of my own problem. These kids already were having tons of questions that they just kind of already understood that none of the adults in their lives were comfortable asking. But when they had the opportunity to, it was like rapid fire questions very young. This is something we all think about very early. We do ourselves and our culture and our society a disservice if we don't answer these questions as early as possible in an age-appropriate way. I think often people think sex education is like showing intercourse in classes or the mechanics of intercourse, but it's so much more than that. It's really communication. How do you advocate for your body and your boundaries? How do you manage pleasure? Good touch, bad touch. How do you really speak up for yourself? Because it's difficult often in sexual situations, and not necessarily intercourse. It could be a stranger just touching you on the back. Like, how do you deal with that? So I think it's been really eye-opening that kids can handle so much more than we give them credit for. And when done right, the health and happiness of that child growing up is just miles beyond what I experienced growing up.
I think it's time to start asking some questions. For starters, what the America?